Chapter 16. Respect.
As time went on, I came to understand the way they lived. They had small family units with 2 adults and 1 or 2 young ones. The females did the child rearing, and the male would gather food and bring it to the female if she had a small baby. The little ones learned fast how to forage for food, but the adult male would bring deer, hog, fish, and birds, just about anything it could find, and they'd share with the others after taking what they needed. I didn't bring as much food in as I did at the creek camp. It was too hard to get it there. I'd only bring enough for Enoch and his family, and that was mostly treats like bluebirds and Hershey bars and some fruit. There were also females with no mates who had little ones. The males came and went, and it was hard to keep track of who was who. They didn't build shelters. They find natural cover like cypress heads and palm hammocks that had a thick canopy to shade and hide them and to protect them from the weather. They'd make what I'd call a nest-like bed made from moss and cedar or cypress leaves, anything soft. I had to be careful not to get too close to their living areas. The few times I did, I'd be chased away, and they only had to tell me once. It was an uneasy trust we all had, one not trusting the other too much, making sure to respect everyone's space. I was a guest in their world, a point they didn't let me forget and would painfully drive home if I forgot. One day, I heard a scream like I've never heard before and hope never to hear again. It was a heart-stopping scream that made my blood run cold, and it didn't stop. I grabbed my shotgun and ran as fast as I could to the clearing. I felt fear running through my body. I ran toward the scream, not knowing what to expect when I got there. I stopped at the edge of the clearing, jacking a slug into the chamber of my shotgun. The scream was sending waves of fear through my body, and my heart was beating so hard I thought it might explode out of my chest. There she was, a female, walking around in circles, holding the lifeless body of her child, its arm dangling down, flopping around as she walked. She kept screaming. It was so loud I could hardly stand it. High-pitched screams that I was sure could be heard for 10 miles. She walked into the woods. The others followed, and so did I, keeping my distance and staying out of sight. She walked and screamed and walked for over an hour, walking around in circles like she was looking for something. She came to a small clearing, not much bigger than 50 feet across, and dropped to her knees. Her screams turned to sobs, loud, heart-wrenching sobs. I stood there, tears running down my face, trying to see through my binoculars. 2 of the males dropped down and started digging with their hands. Dirt was flying as they dug a bowl-shaped hole about 4 to 5 feet deep, 8 feet across. Others gathered cabbage palm fronds, and they put a layer on the bottom of the hole. The one male, her mate, reached out as if to take the child from her arms, and she pulled back, sobbing. After a few minutes, she held the child out, and the male took it and laid it on the palm fronds. More fronds were put on top of the child, and a layer of cedar was placed on top. The dirt was raked back in, and the grave was filled in. Any excess dirt was spread out in a thin layer so no mound would show. Then out of the woods walked another male, holding a small oak tree about 6 feet tall. It had a good root ball, and it looked like great care had been taken to dig it up. The tree was planted in the middle of the grave, and leaves were raked over the grave, concealing it. When they were done, you couldn't tell that the ground had been disturbed. The tree looked like it had been there all along. She sat sobbing. One by one, they walked into the woods, and she was left to grieve alone. Her mate waited at the edge of the woods. Slowly, she stood up, still sobbing, and walked to him. He held her arm and guided her into the woods. I waited about an hour until I was sure they were all gone and went to get a closer look at the grave. If you didn't know it was there, You could not have found it. That tree is a lot bigger now, and I always stop and pay my respects when I'm near. I could take you right to that tree.
Mike said to me one day over the phone. He had just finished relating the story to me again, and his voice was gruff, trying to overcome the embarrassment of his tears. He had broken down crying during the telling.
But I won't. If any of them Bigfoot researchers knew about it, you know what they'd do.
Of course I knew. They'd want to dig it up. A researcher would see it as an opportunity for proof. But to Mike, it was simply a child's grave, deserving of all of the respect that we would afford the body of a human child and a grieving mother's wish that it remained undisturbed. And there, again, is the separation between witness and researcher that so many researchers have a hard time fathoming. A witness is just that. They witness. Mike was there to watch and was careful not to interfere. And that very lack of interference, I feel, was crucial to his ability to gain the trust of these creatures, which in turn allowed him to witness all that he did. Mike simply played the role of a good neighbor. He didn't irritate his neighbors, didn't interfere with their lives, didn't attempt to insinuate himself into their daily routine. He just watched, maintained a healthy distance, shared with them, and respected them. And his behavior was consistent. I would soon come to learn just how important this concept was. Why did I believe him? Because I've gathered, from years of talking to long-term witnesses, that these ingredients are key to developing the trust and rapport necessary to interacting with these creatures. So why hadn't any of my other witnesses had the same kind of luck that Mike had? As I began to examine this question seriously, I found myself better able to appreciate the perfect storm of events Mike repeatedly referred to that caused his success. First, most of my long-term witnesses' experiences occurred at their homes. In other words, the creatures would gradually approach the witness homestead and interact with them within the boundaries of human habitation, not the other way around. In Mike's case, he had stumbled into their backyard, and they had a choice: either accept him or force him out. He had an ambassador in the form of Enoch. Rather than being chased away, they tolerated his presence. Consequently, he was in the perfect setting to observe them behaving naturally. Not as skunk apes doing what they do when they're around humans, but skunk apes living their everyday lives despite a human presence. I also came to realize that Mike was in a unique frame of mind when he began interacting with Enoch. Having experienced intense, multiple tragedies in his life and feeling the effects of those, he was beyond fear. The memories and emotional pain that made up the personal demons he'd mentioned fighting so many times were infinitely more disturbing and frightening to him than any skunk ape. After he related the rendezvous story again to me, I asked him what compelled him to go wading through sometimes neck-deep swamp water infested with alligators, poisonous snakes, and leeches, when he appeared to be more than adequately swamp-savvy and was well aware of the dangers.
I didn't give a shit.
He told me.
What more did I have to lose? You gotta understand that I was in a very dark place in my life. I was wrestling with my demons. I look back now and realize that I did some really stupid things that could have gotten me killed. But I didn't care. Not back then. You wouldn't see me doing half of that stuff now, but I'm in a very different headspace now.
It also occurred to me that Mike's behavior was consistently respectful. He was respectful of their space, the food items they left for him, their boundaries. But the final light of understanding dawned during one of our many phone conversations. in which we discussed his opinion on films, images, sounds, and eyewitness testimony, including The Creature by Jan Clement,